Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good evening. Here is Dr. Michela Ferri. I'm calling from Italy. I'm speaking from Italy. I live in Milan area, in a city between Milan and Bergamo, the two cities in the north Italy in Lombardy. And welcome to this first episode of this new program, Discovering Sacred Christian Art. This program will be online each Tuesday, and of course we will announce you every date step by step. And why discovering sacred Christian art? Because I felt the necessity to speak with you about sacred art, in specific sacred Christian art. These episodes will be steps at the discovery of the history and of the most important elements that make fundamental points in the sacred Christian heart, the heart of our religion. And today, in the day dedicated to Saint John Chrysostom, who was one of the early church fathers, lived between the 4th century. He was born in 348, and he died in 407. He was Archbishop of Constantinople, and we remember him, of course, our liturgy remember him, and I catch the occasion today to remember my dear friend, Father Italo Noris, Xaverians, missionary, who died in Democratic Republic of Congo in a hospital in Bukavu the day before yesterday, at the age of 82. He was a great spirit, a great missionary, a great father for all of us. And he made a visit to my family just 2 weeks ago, and then he left for Africa, and he died in Africa as he desired in his life. He was born in North Italy in 1936 in the province of Bergamo, here in a town close to my house. And he was in Africa for exactly 50 years. Exactly this year. He started his life in Africa in 1968. So to his memory, this episode is dedicated. And now, let me announce you the show title, The Discovery of the Sacred Christian Art, The Origins. Today, I would like to show you what is sacred Christian art at the origin. And let me remind you that this idea comes from several dialogues with colleagues of the Holy Apostles College and Seminary. And as some of you knows, I participated in the last year, 2017, to the famous documentary series here in Italy. Unfortunately, it is not translated in English. It's entitled At the Discovery of the Sacred Art in Italy. This documentary series is a production by the Vatican Television Center. I was in Rome, in Vatican, for the production of this documentary series, and this was a wonderful experience for me to discuss about sacred art, history of the sacred art, with the best Italian scholars in this field of studies. Now, let me introduce, most important, I hope that if you are listening, you have in front of you a smartphone, a PC, a computer, or a tablet, so you can Google some images I will indicate, and you can find, using Wikimedia Commons, these images. But don't worry, it will be easy, don't worry. We speak about early Christian art and early Christian architecture, or Paleo-Christian. Why I say Paleo-Christian is like early Christian, because of the etymology. The ancient Greek term Paleos indicates something old. So I speak about early Christian art, or Paleo-Christian art, to indicate the art produced by Christians or produced under Christian patronage. From the earliest period of Christianity to the year 527, 6th century. It is the year, pay attention, in which the Emperor Justinian took the power. And in that year, we can say that the Byzantine art was born. So this is the reason why this year, 527, is our year in which the early Christian art finished. Generally, of course, in practice, we can say that in 527, Christian art is classified as Byzantine art, or of some other regional type of it. It is hard to know when precisely Christian art began. Of course, we can say it began as soon as our Jesus Christ was dead, and when the apostles started their activity. Early Christian art is generally divided in two periods by the scholars: before and after either two events. The first is the Edict of Milan that took place in 313 here in Milan. It's called also the Edict of Constantine. And this event brought the so-called triumph of the Church under Constantine. The second event, a few years later, is the First Council of Nicaea in 325. The earlier period being called the pre-Constantinian or ante-Nicene period, and after being the period of the first 7 ecumenical councils. So we can say that early Christian art was born around the 1st century and finished in 7th, 8th century. The end of the period of early Christian art, which is typically defined by art historians as being around until the 7th, 8th century, is thus a good deal later than the end of the period of the early Christianity, as typically defined by theologians and church historians, which is more often considered to end under Constantine. Of course, around 313, the date, as I recalled before, of the Edict of Milan, or around 325, the First Council of Nicaea. Anyway, even if we can speak about early Christianity in some way, starting from the 1st century until the 4th century, we can refer to early Christian art starting from the 1st century until the 8th century, Second Council of Nicaea. But the Second Council of Nicaea is all what we will speak about in the future episode for what concerns the Byzantine art. And prior to the year 100, around the years in which Peter and Paul died in Rome, Christians may have been constrained by their position as a persecuted group from producing durable works of art. Since Christianity was generally, or I can say largely, a religion of the lower classes in the first period, the lack of surviving artworks may reflect a lack of funds for patronage and simply small numbers of followers. The Old Testament restrictions, as we know, against the production of graven, an idol or fetish carved in wood or stone images, it may also have constrained Christians from producing art. This is the element of influence of the Judaism. Christians may have made or purchased art with pagan iconography, but given it Christian meanings, as they later did, and as we know, and as we will discover. If this happened, Christian art would not be immediately recognizable as such, as it is. Early Christianity, the early Christians used the same artistic media as the surrounding Roman pagan culture. And here I'm referred to Rome and to Milan. We can see it clearly. I can say in the catacombs in Rome. This media included, for example, fresco, what we call a fresco in Italian, mosaics, sculpture, and then manuscript illumination. Early Christians are not only used Roman forms, but also used Roman styles. Late classical style included a proportional portrayal of the human body and presentation of the space that is very original. And late classical style is seen in early Christian frescoes, such as those in the catacombs of Rome, which include the most examples of the earliest Christian art. I can say that early Christian art and architecture adapted Roman artistic motifs and gave new meanings to what had been pagan symbols, only pagan symbols before. Among the motifs adopted were the peacock, grapevines, and the good shepherd. And I invite now, searching in Wikimedia Commons, the name catacombs and good shepherd, and I'm sure that in your computer will appear the same images I'm looking in this moment. Let me add one thing. Early Christians also developed their own iconography lately, and this is very important. For example, such symbols as the fish. Let me pronounce it in ancient Greek, ichthus. They were not borrowed from pagan iconography. They were exclusively Christian, and that's very important. And then, in some minutes, I will be back on the image of the fish, ichthus, in ancient Greek. I know ancient Greek not because of me, but because in Italy there is a kind of high school. It's called classical lycée, and if you attend this kind of school, you study ancient Greek, Latin, starting when you are 14 years old and until 19 years old. And then I prosecuted also in a university. Let me add an historical motivation for all of this, for the early Christian art. Christianity came to Rome probably through the Jewish minority, which held commercial and cultural relations with the motherland of Palestine. When Peter was in Rome, he was living in the house of rich people, a family who helped him. When Paul of Tarsus visited Rome in 61, he noticed that Rome was as the presence of an organized Christian community. What about the first churches? Among the early followers of Christianity, there were members of the poor and slave classes, but above all, the Roman middle class progressively began to convert the most well-to-do families, who made available their homes for the meetings. So, in Latin, I say domus ecclesiae, that is, house for the assembly, from the old Greek ecclesia, assembly, as we know. The domus ecclesiae were born, and they are the forerunners of the churches. They are the primitive churches. Of these buildings used for domestic meetings have come a few archaeological remains, often found among the foundations of the basilicas, built following the freedom of worship that, as we know, was sanctioned by the Edict of Milan in 313. And what about the catacombs? Pay attention. The bodies of the dead were buried in underground places, later called catacombs. Catacombs is a term documented starting from the 9th century for what concerns the Basilica Apostolorum, that is, Basilica of the Apostles, that is on the Appian Way in Rome. The term catacombs derives from the ancient Greek kata, kumbas, that is, near or under the caves. The use of underground places, that are the catacombs, was certainly not dictated by persecution, and it's wrong to think about persecution only. For hypogia also came from pagans and Jewish people. So in Rome, catacombs, hypogia sites, they already exist from pagans and the Jewish people. Like the catacombs we can see on the Latina Way in Rome, dating back to the second half of the 4th century. So let me repeat that the term catacombs appeared only 9 centuries later, in the 9th century, about, as I recalled, the Basilica of the Apostles. So the life of the catacombs is a life that lasted for 3 centuries, 4 centuries, and so going on. In the 3rd century, Rome was already fully organized for Christian worship, even if, as we know, the 3rd century was again a century against the Christianity, because the year of the Edict of Milan, 313, is only in the 4th century. And despite the clandestinity of the Christian worship, we had in Rome 7 deacons in the 3rd century, who superintended 7 distinct areas, each with its own catacomb area outside the walls. Why outside the walls? And this is a situation that I will speak about next Thursday in the next episode. Let me now speak about the architecture of the early Christian art. And now I wish you have in front of you your computer so you can follow my explanation. The first basilicas were built in Rome, in Milan, in the Holy Land, and in Constantinople. Pay attention. Basilica is a term that Christianity borrowed from the pagan word basileus, is the king. So, basilicas is a term that before Christianity we see it is used in ancient Greek and Roman words. Initially, the model of the basilica was that of the civilian basilicas that now I recall, with an oblong form with 5 naves, with trusted roofs, and with the presence of an orthogonal nave, that is a forerunner of the transept, placed in the final part of the church. It was used by the bishop and the priest, this called presbytery. Now we know why, even in our contemporary church today, it is the presbytery, because we adopt the ancient Greek presbyterion. Is to mean the oldest member, and now from the person we call it the place. Often an apse crowned the bishop's head and the altar, taken from the pagan areas. Around the half-domed opening of the apse, there was in the basilicas an arched structure called the triumphal arch, that is not to be confused with the triumphal arches that were independent monuments. The early Christian churches, I can say not the Domus Ecclesia, but in this case I remain speaking about the basilicas, were characterized by the smooth walls and large windows that illuminated the interior, open in the external walls or in the area outside, clerestory. Beginning at the end of the 4th century, when Christianity was a free religion thanks to Constantine, buildings with a central plan began to spread, especially dedicated to the apostles or to the martyrs, or even Palatine chapels, such as the Basilica of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople, or the very important Basilica of San Lorenzo in Milan. And pay attention, you know that, of course, even if after Constantine, after the Edict of Milan, the life of Christianity was not fully free, because we had, unfortunately, after Constantine, other emperors that tried to condemn again Christian religion. But we will see the history in particular in the next episodes again. In Rome, after the first basilicas founded by Constantine, and let me list these 3. Basilicas in Rome founded by Constantine. First, St. John in Lateran. And now I invite you in searching at least a principal image. Second, our principal Basilica of St. Peter in Vatican, the center of Christianity. And third, St. Paul outside the walls in Rome. In Rome, after these 3 first basilicas, the Bishop of Rome, that was the Pope, started to commission new basilicas to testify, of course, his own growing importance as the Bishop of Rome. Among these basilicas, there are 2 most important basilicas, churches. First, Santa Maria Maggiore, that is translated for you Saint Mary Major, the first basilica built on a papal commission linked to the figure of Pope Sixtus III. And I can recall that we have a miracle connected to the Santa Maria Maggiore, that is the miracle of Saint Mary of the Snow, 5th of August. The second is the famous Santa Sabina, commissioned by Peter Illyricus around 425, outside Rome, the center of Rome. There are few examples of intact Paleochristian basilicas because of the continuous reconstruction and tempering that took place over the centuries. And my list includes Santa Sabina in Rome that I recalled some minutes ago, the Palatine Basilica of Constantine in Trier, the basilicas of Ravenna in central Italy. Ravenna, as you know, is the second Constantinople, and Santa Apollinare in Classe, that is close to Ravenna, the most important church in central Italy for what concerns the Byzantine art. And fourth, we have the Basilica complex of Cimitile near Naples, here in South Italy. Let me now add important elements for what concerns early Christian art of iconography. Early Christian iconography in painting and in mosaics. Pay attention, as well as the symbols and the architecture, even the painting and the mosaic of the early centuries of our Christianity derived their stylistic elements from current artistic movements, linked of course to paganism or to other religions, but attributing other meanings to the representations. First point, an emblematic example is that of the image of the banquet, used for centuries in ancient art, especially, as you know, in the funerary sphere. It became the representation of the Last Supper and therefore a symbol of the celebration of the Eucharist, the fundamental liturgy of our new religion, that was the new religion at that time. The elements of similarity between Christian and pagan representations in the same chronological attribution have led to support the hypothesis that artists worked indistinctly sometimes on the commission of pagans and sometimes of rich Christians. Even the style of the paintings goes from an initial realism to increasingly symbolic and simplified forms, in line with the affirmation of provincial and plebeian art in this late antiquity. With the end of the persecutions from the Edict of Milan in 313, the painting became more magnificent, like the contemporary examples of profane painting. We have two parallel histories. Second point, aniconism. Aniconism, as you know, is the prohibition of portraying God, according to a passage from Exodus in the book 20, and applied until the 3rd century. It involved the need to use symbols to allude to divinity. The sun, the lamb, the lamb as a symbol of the martyrdom of Christ, or the fish. And now let me explain you. The Greek name Ichthus, as I recalled before, and now I explain, is the acronym of Jesus Christos Theou Ios Soter, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, Ichthus. Point number 3. Other sign images are those that instead of narrating an event, suggest a concept. For example, the image of the Good Shepherd, which symbolized the philanthropy of Christ, the praying, the symbol of wisdom. Even these depictions were borrowed from earlier iconographies. For example, in the pagan world, the pastor comes from pastoral scenes, as in the Roman and ancient Greek words, from the allegories of spring and from, for example, the depictions of Hermes, shepherd. The Christ philosopher derives, from the figure of the philosopher Epictetus, who is represented seated. All the themes related to the Old Testament were instead taken from the previous Jewish tradition. Christian and Jewish painting in the 3rd century are almost mating in the 3rd century, as testified by the famous frescoes in the synagogue of Dura Europos in Syria. And now I invite you in searching the synagogue of Dura Europos in Syria, today at the National Museum of Damascus. Here, for what concerns Dura Europos, the formal stylization is linked to the symbolic value of the scenes. Point number 4. Please follow me. Gradually, the loss of interest in the description of real events led to a standardization of symbolic scenes, with a progressive flattening of the figures, preponderance of the frontal representations, and loss of the narrative sense. The artists, in fact, now allude to the spiritual world, are interested in transmitting messages, precise messages, that do not prescind from the formal harmony and from the verisimilitude of the forms. Point number 5. 2 samples of symbols. The rooster who sings at dawn at sunrise is considered a symbol of the light of Christ. The tortoise is a symbol of evil, of sin. Why? Because it's due to the etymology of the term, which is from the Greek tartarukos. In fact, in Italian, we call the tartaruga. Tartarukos in ancient Greek means inhabitant of the Tartarus, and Tartarus is the hell. The fight between the rooster, the cock, and the turtle, God versus evil, is repeatedly represented on the floor mosaics of the Basilica of Aquileia. And I invite you in this moment in searching Aquileia using Wikimedia Commons, and Basilica of Aquileia. The iconography representation of Christ. Please follow me in this last point of our episode. Until the 3rd century, Christ is represented only by symbols. The good shepherd, first, the lamb, second. They are the 2 most important, but we have others. Third, for example, is the image of Christ, Orpheus. He is quite frequent. Christ descended into limbo like Orpheus in the underworld. The prohibition of depicting Jesus Christ failed as a result of the First Council of Nicaea, which took place in 325, when the double divine and human nature of Christ was, as you know, definitively sanctioned. Hence, the Word made man incarnate and endowed with representative human features. The representation of the salient facts of the life of Christ became necessary for the transmission of his message. But this was not the only reason. In fact, the glorification of Christ was reflected as an indirect celebration of the emperors of Christian faith after the Edict of Thessalonica. And let me recall the date, 380, the Edict of Thessalonica. The identification between the empire and the church became even closer, especially from the 5th century, when Christianity began to be seen as a bulwark of the civilized world against the barbarian one. So, we have two samples of the representation of Christ changing. And I recalled these also to my students of the course of the Holy Apostles, of the course of iconography. The first, Jesus Christ was represented without the bird. The frescoes in the Roman catacombs of Domitilla, Christ who teaches the apostles. Please take a moment to try to search for this image. Christ who teaches the apostles in Roman catacombs of Domitilla. Or the mosaic in the church of Santa Costanza in Rome can testify this fact. Second, we have a change. We have Jesus Christ birded. He is later and derives from the Syriac tradition concerning the representation of the cynical philosopher with a beard. Later, he also began to be depicted with a regal insignia, Jesus Christ with the regal insignia, which assimilated him to the emperor, to the Roman emperor, according to the Roman imperial iconography of the so-called Traditio Legis in Latin, that I can translate as delivery of the law. Well, in conclusion, I can say pay attention. We can speak about Christian art, starting immediately from the 1st century, but it's early Christian art until the date of the Second Council of Nicaea, 787. Starting from the Second Council of Nicaea, it is no more early Christian art, but it is Christian art. So remember that in parallel, we have the history of the Byzantine art, that is the Eastern Christian art, in parallel for a few centuries. In the next talk that I will deliver on 20 of September, the next week, I will speak about catacombs in Rome and Vatican necropolis, that is the necropolis of St. Peter Basilica in Vatican. I will invite you to have in front of you again the computer, and let me only add an element that might be of interest for you in preparation of our next episode. The catacombs of Rome are ancient Jewish and Christian underground cemetery areas. They were usually dug into the tufa outside the ancient city walls, since inside the city walls it was not possible to bury the dead. In fact, in our law of the 12 tables, the 12 tables are the most important document of the Roman history about the law. We read, "Do not bury or create yourselves nobody in the city." That is, hominem mortum in urbe, neve seppellito, neve urito. In the subsoil of Rome, there are more 40 catacombs, 40. It's 40 catacombs that run for about 150 kilometers and on more levels. And we will see this in the next episode of Discovering Sacred Christian Art. I hope that you enjoyed this talk. Here is Dr. Michela Ferri from Milan. I am PhD in philosophy, aesthetics, scholar in aesthetics, in a history of art and in sacred art, speaker for the Vatican Television Center at the Discovery of the Sacred Art in Italy. I am the author of the book Contemporary Sacred Art that will be published in next month by En route Books and Media and edited and translated by Cynthia Tulin Wilson. I teach aesthetics in sacred art and Christian iconography and icons for the Holy Apostles College and Seminary. Thank you for your time and thank you for your attention to this first episode of the program Discovering Sacred Christian Art. May God bless you in this Thursday dedicated to St. John Chrysostom. Thank you and have a blessed day. Bye-bye from Italy.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.